Hello everybody, Raven Knight here. So those of you on my Discord knew that I said that my next response video was going to be on a very cringe Ranma article. And I still have that one on the back burner. I'm going to be working on that soon, but then this article crossed my computer screen and I'm sorry, I just couldn't ignore this one. I'm not going to bother with a super long introduction this time, and I'm also aware that not many people want to hear me go on religious tangents, and there are many who would openly mock me or belittle my faith, and I'm aware of those people out there, and I'm sorry for those of you out there who don't like to hear this kind of thing, but as a Christian, I just can't let this kind of thing stand. I can't ignore this article when I know it to be false, and I really hope that no one actually reads this article and takes it seriously, so I want to set the record straight. The article we're taking a look at is called 6 Bible Quotes That Are Blatantly Socialist. All right. First, before we get started, since we're going to be talking about a Christian topic, since it worked so well last time, I'm going to go ahead and change my avatar to this. All right, none Claire is in the house. Okay, let's get into it. Bible quotes that are blatantly socialist. Jesus would not approve of capitalism and our blind worship of billionaires, by Stephanie Lugashard. Published May 31st, 2021. Throughout history, the Bible has been used to justify all kinds of movements and ideologies, from the Crusades to anti-oppressive liberation theology to the abominable Westboro Baptist Church and its fierce opposition to homosexuality and reproductive rights. The Bible contains such a wide array of ideas that can be invoked to advocate for drastically different belief systems. It essentially serves as a Rorschach test that people project their beliefs onto. My dear, you do realize that's exactly what you're about to do, right? You're about to project your beliefs onto the Bible. You're very much lacking in self-awareness, and it is astonishing. That's why Christians run the gamut, all the way from Trump-loving quasi-fascists to radical leftists. And as anyone who has actually read the entire Bible may have noticed, one modern belief system which the Bible liberally gives credence to is socialism, that supposed evil that all Christians are expected to hate. Okay. Real question now, serious question. You said, as anyone who has actually read the entire Bible may have noticed. Have you read the entire Bible? From cover to cover? Have you read from Genesis to Revelations? Have you studied it? Have you looked through it? Have you analyzed the text? Have you discussed it with a Bible study group or a pastor? Have you really studied the Bible? Let alone read it? No? I mean, I'm genuinely curious. Have you? Because as we're about to see, I don't think you have. Otherwise, you wouldn't say something so laughably false. In case you're boggled as to why anyone would ever use the words Bible and socialism in the same sentence, I've compiled a list of Bible quotes that highlight the Bible's radical ideas. But before I start, please note that while I don't identify as a Christian, I'm an agnostic atheist and yes, a socialist. I have respect for all religions, including Christianity. My intention is to expose the hypocrisy of some of Christianity's proposed adherents who twist its meaning to promote a brutally pro-capitalist agenda. In that spirit, these are 6 Bible quotes that align with socialist ideals. Okay, three things here from the start. Number 1, you call yourself an agnostic atheist. That sounds like a contradiction to me. I'll admit that I'm not fully sure on the way this works, but from what I understand, an agnostic does not know what they believe and are willing to explore, while an atheist believes there are no gods or God out there to follow or believe. So if you're an atheist, how can you be unsure or uncertain in your beliefs when you don't have any? And if you're an agnostic, how can you profess not to believe in anything when you're unsure of what you believe? I mean, all of that feels very contradictory, but again, maybe I just don't fully understand that worldview, so I will let that slide. Next, number 2, you admit you're a socialist. Well, starting off out of the gate, I can see your bias on display, but I anticipated this because only a true socialist would try to inject their political ideology on things that have nothing to do with them. And third, finally, you tell us all your mission statement, what you plan to do, that your intention is to expose the hypocrisy of some of Christianity's proposed adherents who twist its meaning to promote a brutally pro-capitalist agenda. No. Let me tell you what you're really planning to do here, what your real motivation is, what your goal is. Your intention is to take verses from the Bible, twist their meanings to suit a socialist narrative that you want the Bible to have, in the vain hope that you will convince Christians to side with your deluded ideology when, in truth, if the Bible actually did support your ideology, surely you'd want to believe it, right? Okay. Let's get into the verses. Verse number 1. Quote 1. Jesus, I tell you the truth. It's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Matthew 19:23. To fully understand this quote, we first need to discuss the context. Jesus didn't say this out of the blue. He said it when a young rich man approached him and asked how he can inherit eternal life. Jesus first reminded him that he must fulfill the 10 Commandments. The man then said he's already done so and asked, "What do I still lack?" Jesus replied, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Then come, follow me." Upon hearing that, the man felt dejected and walked away. His wealth would clearly preclude him from getting into heaven. And then Jesus uttered the famous aforementioned quote, emphasizing that a rich man entering heaven is about as likely as a camel fitting through the eye of a needle, which we all know is impossible. This quote makes it abundantly obvious that Jesus believed that being rich is inherently immoral and incompatible with Christian values. In today's context, this means that billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates would have no conceivable way of going to heaven unless they were to give all their wealth to the poor to the point where they're no longer wealthy. Okay, this verse does not support socialism. You did explain the context leading up to the verse, but you left out what was said afterwards, and we'll see why. Let's read what comes after that verse in verses 25 through 26. The verse reads, "When the disciples heard this, they were greatly astonished and asked, 'Who then can be saved?' Jesus looked at them and said, 'With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible.'" See, at this time period, there was a popular belief that those who were rich were especially blessed by God more than others, hence why they had such wealth to begin with. So the apostles were astonished that it seems impossible for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. How is it? If the rich can't get in, who can? They ask him, who can be saved if not the rich? They're the ones most blessed. If they can't be saved, who can be saved? And Jesus points out, all things are possible through God. For man, it's impossible. But through God, all things are possible. See, the rich and the poor can both enter heaven through God. Money can't do it. See, that's the thing. The problem was this guy worshipped money. Money was his God. But money cannot get you into the kingdom of heaven. That's why it's impossible. If money is your God, if your wealth is your God, you can never enter the kingdom of heaven. But through God, you can be accepted. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. You can enter heaven if God brings you in. Because wealth does not determine salvation. God does. Jesus does not take issue with those who are rich or those who gain wealth. See, the problem, like I said, is that wealth can become the Lord of your life. Jesus knew the heart of the man he was talking to. He knew that he was more in love with his wealth than he was with God. So he challenged him to abandon his wealth in exchange for God. This is not socialism. Socialism is not an invitation to relinquish wealth. It is a government-mandated order to do so. But Jesus never advocated for the government to seize wealth or redistribute it. Jesus does not hate the wealthy as you seem to think he does. The point here is that if money is our God, then how can we have any other God besides it? And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all of them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Matthew 21:12. Here's the full story behind this quote, which describes a famous scene that's depicted in the painting above. In a temple in Jerusalem, Jesus' disciples had gathered to celebrate Passover. Merchants and money changers in the temple offered some commercial services. They sold doves to be sacrificed and offered to exchange money in the currency needed to pay temple dues. But they didn't do it in a way that Jesus considered ethical. They cheated customers, charged prohibitive fees, prioritized profit over ethics, swindled believers, and exploited the poor. According to scholars, these temple merchants also colluded with the aristocracy to profit off of poor people's poverty. They charged interest when lending money from the wealthy to poor people who were in severe debt, thereby making enormous profits. Jesus was incensed that these merchants had the gall to turn the temple into what he called a den of thieves. So he expelled them from the temple and literally turned the tables. This event is regarded by scholars as being the catalyst that triggered his crucifixion. It convinced the enemies that he was a rabble-rouser. He presented the danger of inciting revolutionary sentiment among the poor, exploited masses. The story illustrates that Jesus held radical, socialist ideas about the inherent dissonance between commerce and spirituality, and the exploitive nature of profit-making endeavors such as charging interest, which he viewed as a grave sin. Okay, this event has nothing to do with socialism, and it also proves you're not familiar with the Bible. You said that this event happened during the Passover? No, see, Jesus cleared the temple twice. And this was the second time he did it. The first time was indeed during the Passover, but you can read about that in John 2:13 through 25. This verse is just after Jesus is coming to Jerusalem after arriving on a donkey. The two things are different. But you might say that's nitpicking, so let's focus on the crux of this message. Let me help explain how this worked. Let me explain what Jesus was having a problem with. You see, Gentiles and travelers from all over the world came to the Temple of Jerusalem to worship God, to make sacrifices, and in doing so find salvation. However, to make sacrifices, you need animals to do so, and that's where you get the merchants. And the merchants in the temple wouldn't accept foreign money, only temple coins. So money changers were there to exchange foreign money for these temple coins at an increased price. Then the merchants who sold animals for sacrifice would artificially increase the prices of their animals to higher prices. Since most foreigners didn't know the exchange rates, they were easily fooled, and thus the temple would collect a larger profit off of them not knowing any better. They essentially use commercialism to disrupt worship and salvation, and anything that stands in the way of salvation in one's relationship with the Lord is an issue to Jesus. Now, you'll notice that while Jesus definitely takes issue with the wicked form of commercialism in business here, he's even more furious that it was done in his Father's house and as a means to prevent people from reaching salvation without paying for it. Also, that bit you added about how he would incite revolutionary sentiment among the poor masses, that's what the Pharisees said he would do, but that's not what he was actually doing. That was the excuse the Pharisees used to make their case to Rome. See, the Pharisees wanted Jesus dead for months at this point, but they didn't have the power to execute him unless they could prove to Rome that he was a danger to Roman power or peace. But to Rome, all Jesus was just another preacher wandering around, something that they've dealt with before and didn't really care about. But the thing was, the Pharisees had finally found their in here. This was the moment they could use to appeal to Rome. But the question is, was Jesus actually trying to stir up sentiment against Rome or government? No. In fact, Jesus answers that question clearly when he says, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's." Or, if you want a more direct one, you could look at where Paul says in Romans 13, 1 through 7, quote, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone that you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. This is Paul warning us not to try and revolt and turn against our rulers just because we dislike them. Now, of course, there's context to that verse too, and I don't want to go off on a long sermon here. And of course, there are exceptions. There are certain events that we need to discuss and talk about to make that verse make more sense. But let's leave that alone. I don't want to go on a sermon. My point is that if you're trying to claim that Jesus was a revolutionary who was trying to stand up to government oppression, he was not. In reality, he obeyed the Roman government insofar as it was godly to do so. Okay? That's what this is talking about. And my point here is this. You're trying to use this moment where Jesus threw aside tables and wrecked the temple marketplace, saying that they were a den of thieves. You're trying to say, well, this is proof that he's a revolutionary who supports socialism because he stood up against commercialist thieves. No, he was not standing up to those people. He was protecting the house of worship. He was protecting his Father's house. That has nothing to do with socialism. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth. Matthew 6:24. The original word used in this context was you can serve both God and mammon. Mammon is a biblical term for riches that was typically used to describe the debasing influence of material wealth. It carries the connotation that possessing such excessive amounts of money is intrinsically unethical. So this pithy quote is a succinct indictment against the rich. It perfectly encapsulates Jesus' belief that you cannot simultaneously be wealthy and be a good person. The two are mutually exclusive. If you wish to be a good person, you must prioritize your spirituality above any desire for wealth. Being wealthy means you are hoarding essential resources from those who are in need, and that's immoral. Okay, you are once again reading what you want from this quote. So Jesus is saying that you cannot worship money and God. We talked about this earlier. But he's not saying that acquiring money is bad or immoral. You make a false equivocation here. You assume that having money means you are somehow denying it to others, and that is not true. In fact, there are many millionaires and billionaires who donate often to charities, homeless shelters, and disaster relief efforts. They were able to use their profits and invest it in better ways. In fact, there's a parable from Jesus all about this. In Matthew 25:14-30, it reads, quote, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them his property. To one he gave 5 talents. To another 2 talents, to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more." Traded here can basically mean invest. "So also he had the 2 talents who made 2 talents more. So the guy with 2 talents also did the same thing. He invested and gained more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, 'Master, you have delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' And he who also had the 2 talents came forward and saying, 'Master, you have delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more.' And his master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' He also who had received the 1 talent came forward saying, 'Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours.' But his master answered him, 'You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." In other words, in this story, it seems that the men who invested money put their money to good use and turned a profit. Those who had would have more. They were praised and promised reward for their actions. Meanwhile, the man who hid his money to save it for himself was punished and called wicked for it. You'll notice that some of the arguments of the first talent comes up too. He says that you reap what you do not sow, and you take where you have not plowed seed, basically saying you steal to make your money. You steal things to make your money. And then the master makes a good point. He says, if I really do this stuff, maybe you should have invested so that you would have had more. Instead, you hid it. Jesus had no problem with the accruement of wealth, merely the worship of it. It is not wrong to gain money. It is not wrong to work and build up money. It's definitely not wrong to invest money. The problem is when you worship money, that is a problem. That Jesus, to one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Luke 6:27. This quote contains a lot of ideas to unpack. The first part about offering your other cheek could be interpreted as an endorsement of nonviolence and pacifism. In fact, this quote is often cited by Christian anarchists to argue against modern government's use of military force to preempt war or to respond to attacks. These anarchists believe that these imperialistic, extensively powerful military apparatuses should be dismantled in order to comply with Christian values. Yes, I have heard this argument before, and it is still ridiculous. Might I direct you to Luke 22:36-38, which reads, quote, "He said to them, 'But now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag, and if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment.' The disciples said, 'See, Lord, here are 2 swords. That's enough,' he replied." Christ knew that eventually conflicts would arise and we would be required to defend ourselves. That's why he instructed us to have a sword on hand. The cheek-slapping verse refers to insults. A slap on the cheek is not a dangerous or harmful thing. Nothing but a cheek slap. Jesus is telling us not to overreact to an insult and react without violence. The second part of this quote, which encourages tolerancy, allowing others to take away your goods, contains radical anarchistic sentiment as well. It can easily be interpreted as rejecting the notion of private property, an idea that is held sacred under capitalism. Again, you are reading what you want from this. Jesus is merely saying here that we should not repay wrong for wrong. If someone steals your coat, then offer your tunic as well. Clearly, they need it more than you do, and these things are replaceable. But are you saying the Bible doesn't advocate for private property? I'm sorry, but here's a verse you may find interesting. Ephesians 4:28. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. I particularly like this verse since it calls for you to actually work and do something useful with your life instead of demanding rich people just give you crap. It calls you to work and earn so you can give. It says there's a clear difference between working and giving by choice rather than being forced to do so. You constantly talk about how the rich are wrong for accruing money, and yet here it says you should work to make money so that some of that money can be given to others. You can't really give generously until you have, can you? And the demand to give everyone who begs from you further reinforces the idea that hoarding wealth and possessions beyond what you need is greedy and selfish. And again, you are assuming that merely having wealth or gaining wealth means you're withholding it from others. This is not true. It flies in the face of reality. Jesus is saying to give to those who beg. He is not telling the government to take your money and give it away as they see fit. Jesus calls for us to be charitable and compassionate. You are calling for a government that forces us to give money whether we like it or not. There is a difference. In fact, Jesus said famously, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's." In other words, the things that belong to the government should go to the government, but everything else goes to God. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against Nathan, neither shall they learn war anymore. Isaiah 2:4. This quote is an explicit expression of pacifism and anti-imperialism. It is a call for an end to war. The assertion that nations should not learn war anymore couldn't be any more explicitly anti-war. Anti-war values are centered to socialism, since socialism is opposed to nationalism, oppression, imperialism, exploitation, and the rapacious extraction of resources from the earth, which is what wars are sometimes fought over. Beating swords into plowshares has been used as a mantra among anti-war and anti-imperialist socialist movements for centuries. Its literal meaning is that the materials used to make weapons should be repurposed for peaceful civilian use. A modern application of this insight could involve dismantling all the nuclear weapons and other military equipment to make things that won't kill people, like Jamaican reggae artist Pete Tosh's Stratocaster guitar, which was built using an M16 rifle. In fact, a Christian pacifist group called the Plowshares Movement calls for doing exactly that. You have no understanding of Isaiah or what's being said in this passage. This verse is not a command or a political ideal, it's a prophecy about what will happen when the Lord comes at the end of all things. That war will come to an end and that conflict will cease. This is a prophecy of the kingdom of heaven coming to earth and the new Jerusalem being established. This has nothing to do with your political ideology, and it is not an advocation for anything. In fact, it is a guarantee that until the Lord comes, wars will always be a part of society and history. Only when the Lord comes will we have no need for swords and spears. And the idea that socialism is the only ideal that would like peace is ludicrous to the extreme. You said earlier that you didn't identify as a Christian, so please don't pretend you understand the verses you likely Google searched. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Matthew 5:5. The historical connotation of the word meek makes this quote even more socialist than it might initially appear to a contemporary audience. Scholars note that its meaning has evolved over time, and the difference is subtle but important. Whereas today it implies gentle, soft, or timid, back then it meant something more along the lines of powerless, humble, or poor. In other words, the meek are those who are marginalized and impoverished, those who have been unjust acts inflicted upon them by an unequal society. In that light, the statement is clearly radical and revolutionary. It's suggesting that those who are systemically made powerless due to structural injustice will be rewarded. The tables will be turned. On the flip side, those who are powerful, such as billionaires and political leaders, will be on the losing end of that bargain. They will not inherit the earth or go to heaven. Sounds pretty socialist to me. You have no understanding of that line, and you admit that you're trying to put it in a new light. Allow me to explain this passage to you, since I'm willing to bet you Google search this verse and don't actually understand its context or biblical meaning. This verse is one of the Beatitudes, a series of points made by Jesus that do four things. They give a code of ethics for Christians to live by. They contradict the worldly way of thinking. They counter the Pharisees' hypocritical ideals. And they also demonstrate how the Old Testament expectations can be fulfilled. That's because each of these connect to a piece of the Old Testament scripture that provides context and meaning. So, Matthew 5:5 clashes with the worldly idea that power defines who controls the world. See, at this time, the world functioned on an idea of might makes right. But Jesus said that those who do not crave power, the meek, will in the end inherit the earth, not the strong. This verse is in reference to Psalms 37:5-11, which reads, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their own ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while, and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity." In your biased and prejudiced view, you think that this verse means those who are meek are those who are treated unjustly by a capitalist society, and all those political leaders and billionaires will be broken and beaten. However, note that nowhere in this beatitude does Jesus mention wealth as evil, and nowhere in the Psalms verse does he reference wealth as evil, because wealth is not called evil anywhere in the Bible. Only the love of wealth is called evil, those who worship wealth. The passage says that those who are meek must wait on the Lord, and they will be given their reward. Do not crave power. Do not give in to evil. Do not seek revenge or revolution, for justice and vengeance belong to the Lord, not to man. You say that the verse sounds revolutionary? Well, it would to the people of those days, because they'd be shocked that the meek could inherit anything. But to you, it sounds revolutionary because you want it to meet your twisted idea that the underprivileged will get their due. Well, that seems to me you don't care about the spiritual meaning of this passage. You just like what it means in terms of what you can get. Who's the greedy one again? You look at this passage and you say, look at this, see this, the underprivileged will have their day. You big, mean billionaires and millionaires and all of your wealth and power and political persuasion, you'll go down one day and then we'll be the ones running things. Wow, sounds to me like you care about what you can get and about what you can have out of this deal. Whereas Jesus is saying, don't crave anything for yourself. You will get your reward by obedience, by faith, by waiting on me. Not by looking scornfully at your enemy and hoping they go down. Wait on the Lord. In fact, I would actually point out the fact that Jesus tells us to love our enemies. Do you love your enemies, Miss Socialist? Sorry to burst your bubble if you're a conservative Christian, but these quotes make it self-evident that, in modern terms, Jesus himself was pretty socialist. If it wasn't clear from his ministry and his healing of the sick and the outcasts of society, his words make it even more explicit that true Christians should be focused on helping the poor and eliminating inequities. Let me ask you a question. A serious question, okay? If Jesus really was a socialist in every way, if his ministry was socialist, if his healing of the sick and outcast was socialist, if his words are all explicitly socialist in nature, I just gotta know, why aren't you a Christian? Why not run to this religion that meets your beliefs in every way? You are, after all, an agnostic atheist, whatever that means. You don't know what you believe, right? That's what an agnostic is. You don't know what you believe. Then why not lean towards this? It fits your political ideology quite well, according to you, if you're right. But the thing is, you don't want to become a Christian. Why? Because you don't actually believe any of it, or what you're saying either. You are an admitted atheist and a socialist. You have no comprehension of the biblical ministry or message, and you don't believe it. Your whole outlook is on what you can gain, not what you can give. You hate the wealthy when Jesus called us to love our neighbor. You hate those in power when Jesus said, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And when Paul said that the powers that be on this earth are put there by God and for a reason. And you claim that Jesus called for sharing of wealth when there is an actual moment in the Bible when Jesus denounces this. In Luke 12:13-15, it reads, quote, someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Notice here that the speaker, the one speaking to Jesus, wants the inheritance his brother is getting divided evenly. If Jesus was a socialist, he would likely have said, of course, yes, both of you should be given equally. Instead, he said, I am not your judge and I am not your arbiter, but beware of your greed. Because Jesus knew what is at the root of such thoughts, what is at the root of people who talk this way. The cold truth is that this man, just like you, only want those who are rich brought down because you want what they have. You want the millionaires and billionaires to go down and suffer because they have and you don't. You want money and you don't like that they have more than you. And this is a form of greed that Jesus is warning you about, but you don't want to listen to him. You don't want to hear Jesus warn you about having greed in your heart. How about the fact that you shouldn't covet what is your neighbor's, that you shouldn't be envious? You seem pretty envious and covetous, but you don't want to hear that part. You cherry pick aspects of the Bible that you think will support the idea that God hates the wealthy when that is not true. And it's also obvious that he would not condone the exploitative capitalist system that dominates around the world today. It's no coincidence that explicitly socialist Christian movements have sprung up, from liberation theology, most prominently Latin American, Black, and Palestinian, to worker cooperative-driven Birdhoff communities. Let's not allow the cruel rhetoric of disingenuous Christians to overshadow the beautiful anti-oppressive values that many socialist Christians uphold. Now, I don't know much about this liberation theology you speak of. I'll do some research on it later, but I would like to offer these final verses both to them and to you. Galatians 1:6-9. Quote, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. And then Romans 16:17-20, quote, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them, for such persons do not serve our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own appetites, and by smooth talk and flattery they deceive the hearts of the naive. For your obedience is known to all, so that I rejoice over you. But I want you to be wise as to what is good and innocent as to what is evil. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. You do not understand the message of salvation. You have not accepted the message of salvation. You misquoted and misused the verses of the Bible 6 times to push a political ideology that runs in contrast to the scriptures. Socialism at its core teaches that a government should work to basically redistribute wealth and force the rich to be brought low. This has nothing to do with what the Lord taught us to do. The Lord in the Bible teaches us to be humble, to love one another, to forgive one another, and to be charitable and generous unto others. You teach that we should hate those who have more, that we should revolt and lash out at those who make a profit, and that capitalism and conservatism are anti-Christian. But Christianity has nothing to do with worldly politics. Jesus says that the former things will pass away. One day, I'm sure that I will lay down my sword and be embraced by my Father in heaven. But until that day comes, my sword stays drawn against the likes of such blasphemy and deception as what you spread. Because at the end of the day, the Christian government is not socialist, and it's not conservative either. The Christian government is a monarchy. And hail to the King of Kings. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.